Hello, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Thank you for joining me. It's been a while. I've been busy with a lot of different things. Finished the book I was writing, and now it's in the editing process. So it's kind of freed up some time. And I had gone to a conference in Omaha, and there was a woman there that I had spoken with about some things. We were discussing some things with the Fivefold Ministry, and she pulled me aside as we were leaving the place we were having lunch and said, "Do you do videos? You need to do some teaching videos. Like, you need to continue to teach this stuff." And I was like, well, I've done some. I haven't done some in a while, but I do. And she said, you need to keep doing that. And I felt like that was a nudge from the Lord to just keep going in this. And then I was like, okay, God, I'll make some videos. And then I got nothing. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to talk about. Like, what do you want me to do this on? So I just kind of waited. And the Lord has been really speaking about the identity crisis that's going on right now in the world and in the church, because the world, the chaotic world, usually is reflecting chaos that's going on in the body of Christ. And we have an identity crisis. So as he was speaking about that, he started confirming and reassuring and establishing and putting me on a firm foundation of who I am in him. And that's a continuing process. But I was struggling with two questions, two issues. And as he started to speak to me about those issues and give me the revelation to understand and figure out the solution, the remedy, what was going on there, I realized he was giving me material for a new video series. And I started writing it out thinking that it was going to be like this one, and then there was going to be another one after that. And as I am going through it, I realized it's 10 pages long, and this cannot be one. I'm not going to do that to you guys. So I shortened up. I figured out where I could end, and it's only a page and a half, and it's really big print, so it's not going to be too long. But the two issues that I was facing were past trauma triggers and habits. We have scars that come from hard things that we go through, and when we start encountering someone in our lives that starts behaving sort of like someone who really hurt us, it can trigger a response that's not necessarily warranted or rational. And I had a few of those instances. I had some times where I kind of got real anxious and agitated with some of my family members, and I knew where it was coming from. Like, I knew that place in my past that it was coming from, and I'm like, man, God, am I always going to struggle with this? And I wish I really didn't have this in my personality, and I wish I didn't have these characteristics, and I need to get rid of this, and it's such a struggle. And then the accuser comes in and starts telling you, oh yeah, you're never going to overcome that. That's just part of who you are now, and you're just a mess, and God can't use you to do what you think you're being called to do because you're just never going to overcome this. And I was struggling with that. And then the Lord asked me a question. He said, you said yes to me, right? And I said, yes. There was a time that I sat in my prayer closet and I said yes to whatever the Lord had for me, no matter what. And he showed me how that applied to past, present, and future, because he sits outside of time, and started showing me how he uses all of those things. He works all things for our good. And he pointed to the story of Peter's denial and his courageous, brave life and his death. He was martyred. He was crucified upside down because he didn't want to die the same death Jesus did. He didn't feel worthy, so he had them crucify him upside down. And I thought, man, this was the second issue. The second issue was the accuser telling me that I only love God because of what he can do for me. You don't really love God. You think you love God, but if things got rough, you wouldn't, even though I've been through tons of trials and dry years and years where he seemed silent and things seemed hopeless and things certainly weren't going my way and my prayers weren't being answered. It was almost like this silence, and that was kind of a testing period, kind of my Job trial, not in the severity that Job had, but it was a time that God used to shape me and to show me that I do indeed press into him when things aren't going my way. I'm not just there when God is doing things that I like, or when everything is peachy keen. I'm there through all of it, and I will never stop pressing into him. But Satan still tries to come and say, yeah, you're not genuine. That's not a genuine love that you have for God. You're not genuinely devoted, and you only want what you can receive. And when the Lord said, you said yes to me, and it's past, present, and future, by you saying yes to me, that proves your love for me, because now would you still say yes to me no matter what, knowing that all the painful things you've gone through are the result of you saying yes to me no matter what? And I was like, absolutely yes. And that just was such a precious moment for me, because it really established that committed relationship. It really helped me to see that it's one-sided, and God knows that I love him. He knows that I love him. I know that he loves me, but he knows that I love him. And that is why there's so much grace, and that is why he is going to use me for what he's going to use me for. And all of those things, going through all of that and being willing to go through all of that, is proof that he can use me for what he's going to use me for. So let's talk about Peter. So Peter's denial is a really interesting thing. And I made a video about this a while ago, pretty short video. My husband had a revelation about Peter's denial that I had never seen before and I'd never heard before, that was really incredible. So Peter's denial is in all four Gospels. But in the Gospel of John, in chapter 18, this is what the account says. I'm going to read chapter 18, verses 15 through 18. And then we'll skip ahead through some of the details and read verses 25 through 27. Okay. So it says, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. And we know that that other disciple is John. He's writing about himself, and he's always the other disciple, or the disciple that Jesus loved, as if Jesus didn't love all the rest. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, the other disciple, and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. So now they're in the courtyard, and it's just John and Jesus. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it again and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied him again, and immediately a rooster crowed. And the rest of this, all of the accounts say, that one of them says that Jesus turned and looked at Peter. So they're all in the courtyard together. So you have, and this is a very different scene than the other Gospels, because the other ones will say there was a group of people there, or some of the servants were there. But who these people were that were in the courtyard were the people that arrested Jesus. So these servants and these officers were there to arrest Jesus. They arrested him, hauled him back to the high priest, and they were in the courtyard there. Jesus, John, his accusers, the people who arrested him, okay? And the officers and the servants of the high priest are around this fire that they've built. Peter, who was in the garden, chopped off the ear of the servant of the high priest, okay? So I'm sure in that moment, and Jesus picks up the ear, and it's like, this is not the time for that, heals the ear, puts it back on, reattaches it, heals it, and gets arrested and goes. And I'm sure Peter was just like, man, that was so stupid. I failed again. My, ambitious little spirit flared up again, and all of that, warrior angst that's built up in me got the best of me, and I screwed it up again, and that was so stupid, and why am I like this? So then he goes with them all, follows them all to the house of the high priest. And John, who's known by the high priest, so has some stature, gets in there with Jesus. He goes with Jesus in because he's known. So now Peter is outside the door, and he was just a fisherman when this started. Or so he thought, he was just a fisherman. So now, feeling stupid for what he did, feeling unworthy and unimportant, and not of high enough stature to get into this place that he wants to go into, where his Savior is, and he's supposed to be in there. You know, he's supposed to be there. This is what God's calling him to do, and he can't get in. And so John, who's the one that has all the clout, who is loved by Jesus, goes and gets him in. And now he's in there, but he's in there with all the people that saw him cut the ear off of the high priest's servant. And they start questioning him. Weren't you there? Now, Peter, just the act of cutting off that ear meant that he was not afraid to fight and die. He was not afraid of the battle. And when Jesus told him, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times, it was very likely that Peter thought he was talking about Peter being afraid to die for Jesus, or being afraid of persecution that comes with being a follower of Jesus. And that wasn't the case at all, but that's where his mind went. And he was like, oh yeah, no, I'm not. And so he proved it in that garden when he sliced off that soldier's ear, not realizing that that wasn't the denial that Jesus was talking about. So Peter gets in there, and he's not worried about dying or being tortured or persecuted. He's worried about being thrown out of a place that he doesn't feel like he belongs in to begin with. He's worried that God cannot get him into the position he needs to be in to fulfill his calling. And this is something that I've struggled with a whole lot, feeling like you want me to do this and I don't have the status to do this. And it took quite a bit for the Lord to get me to finally sit down and just trust him to do it. And when I did, he literally did. He moved me from the back to the front and then stood me up so everyone could see me. I mean, it was like, I'll tell you guys about that later, but that was pretty amazing. And just blessed me so sweetly, and then gave me one more confirmation of who he's called me to be, just in case I needed it without me asking. It was just the coolest thing. So yes, so Peter is feeling like he's not enough, and like he's not trusting God to get him through. And so he goes in there, and he doesn't want them to figure out who he is, because if they do, they might throw him out because he cut off that ear, even though the ear has been healed. So no harm, no foul. That might have been a good opportunity to witness to those people. But so then Peter denies him 3 times, but it's not out of cowardice. It's out of lack of trust. And he denied who his father was because he didn't trust him. And so when that rooster crowed and Jesus looked at him, he realized, you were right, and I didn't trust you, and I didn't trust my Heavenly Father to get me where I need to be. And he went out and wept bitterly because he couldn't believe that he missed it so badly. But then we see that Jesus restored him. And according to the times that he denied him 3 times Jesus, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep 3 times. And restored him, and then elevated him. And Peter ended up fulfilling that promise that he had in his heart, that I will never deny you, and I'm not afraid to go to the death for you. So that was something that the Lord used. Those mistakes, those hiccups, were the very things that the Lord used to develop Peter into the man that he needed to be. And he then had the understanding of trusting God to do things and listening to his voice. And his worth was established. God established his worth through all of those things. And Jesus established them when he said, hey, do you love me? Feed my sheep. This is your position. And you don't have to fight for it, and you don't have to lie for it. You can just walk right into it, and I will walk you in, and you don't have to worry about figuring it out yourself. And ultimately, Peter gave the ultimate sacrifice. God used his trauma to develop his character. Yes, so he went through all of that, and the point of us going through those hard things going through traumatic experiences and having hiccups and scars and these quirks that are left over and things that God needs to work out. The point of going through any kind of suffering as a believer is so that we will be able to fully understand others. Because in order to fully understand others, we have to be able to identify with them, to be able to empathize through experience with them. Our mistakes are shared. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says there is no sin uncommon to man. There is nothing that you're struggling with that somebody else hasn't struggled with. Our traumas are also shared. There's always someone out there that's gone through the same trauma, and God uses those traumas so we can help each other, so we can help the next person that's going through that, help them to heal, and also so we can recognize the scars and the triggered responses. If you haven't been through something and you don't understand those triggers in yourself, you're not going to understand them in somebody else, and it's going to be mistaken for something that it's not, and for evil intent. And Jesus did this for us. Hebrews 2:14-15 says, "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage." Jesus had to face the fear of death. Most of us, all of us know we're going to die someday. Some people are diagnosed with cancer or something, and they know their death might be soon. Jesus knew that he was going to die early. He knew when he was going to die, and he knew how he was going to die. So he had to face all of that, knowing that he was going to be tortured to death, and make a conscious decision not to be ruled by fear. And he overcame that for us. It also says, "For indeed he does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham." He never identified with angels. They weren't made in his likeness. Therefore, in all things he had to be made like his brethren, as do we, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. Everything we go through, every hard thing, is to equip us to be able to aid those who are going to go through that in the future. And John 6:38 says, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." Luke 6:40 says, "A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher." So we are called to be like Jesus. And that doesn't mean we seek out suffering like Jesus had to suffer. But it means that we are willing to say yes to God no matter what. To say, well, if this is what I have to go through, so be it. Yes. So I'm going to end it there. There's a lot more here, but I will end it here. And I hope that this whole series helps you. I hope you have a wonderful new year, 2024. It's going to be an awesome year. It's going to be a very different year. There's just a very different something coming. So that's all I got. That's not all I got. That's all I'm going to give you. So I will see you guys later. Au revoir.